High Commander Al stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, and watched the blue planet grow larger on the viewing screen. In his 3 decades of military service, he had overseen the subjugation of 14 worlds. This would be his 15th, and by far the easiest. The planet's inhabitants called it Earth. They were a young species, barely capable of reaching their own moon. Their vessels moved on primitive chemical propulsion. Their weapons were crude projectiles and fission devices. The scouts had been thorough in their assessment. This world would fall within days, perhaps hours. "All ships report ready, High Commander," his tactical officer announced. The bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency, their scaled hands moving across holographic displays. Outside, 847 warships hung in perfect formation, each one a mountain of metal and energy capable of reducing a continent to ash. Al allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Confederacy had spent generations building this empire. They had faced warriors who could regenerate from fatal wounds, machines that thought faster than organic minds, and energy beings that existed in multiple dimensions. Earth had none of these advantages. Earth had nothing but primitive technology and soft, fragile bodies. "Broadcast the ultimatum," Al commanded. "All frequencies, make sure they understand their options." The communications officer worked in silence for a moment, then nodded. "Transmission sent, High Commander. Standard surrender terms. They have 1 rotation of their planet to respond." Al settled into his command chair. In his experience, primitive species reacted in predictable ways. Some begged. Some threatened with weapons they didn't possess. Some simply went silent, paralyzed by fear. He had seen it all before. The response came within minutes, far sooner than expected. "High Commander, we're receiving a reply," the communications officer said, his voice uncertain. "It's short." "Play it." A human voice filled the bridge, speaking through their translation systems. The words were calm, almost casual. "We've been waiting for you." Al frowned. "That's all?" "Yes, High Commander. No elaboration, no surrender, no counterthreats, just those 5 words." The bridge fell silent. Several officers exchanged glances. Al felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, quickly suppressed. It meant nothing. Bravado from a species facing extinction. He had heard brave words before, right up until the moment their cities burned. "Begin the attack," he said. "Target their major population centers. Show them we are serious." The fleet moved into attack formation, spreading across high orbit like a predator's claws. Weapons systems charged, drawing power from the ship's massive cores. Targeting computers locked onto the cities below, calculating optimal strike points for maximum destruction with minimum resource expenditure. Then the first ships exploded. Not 1 or 2, dozens. Across the entire fleet formation, capital ships simply came apart in bursts of white fire. Al lurched forward in his chair, his scaled hands gripping the armrests. "Report what's happening." His tactical officer's hands flew across the displays, data streaming too fast to process. "Multiple impacts, kinetic projectiles, High Commander. They're coming from everywhere." On the viewing screen, Al could see the chaos. Ships twisted and burned, their shields failing under impacts that shouldn't have been possible. The projectiles were simple metal rods, nothing sophisticated, but they were moving at impossible speeds. Relativistic velocities that no primitive species should have been able to achieve. "Where are they firing from?" Al demanded. "We don't know, our sensors show. High Commander, there are weapons platforms hidden throughout the orbital space. Hundreds of them. They were disguised as debris, inactive satellites, space junk. They've been waiting in cold shutdown. We never detected them." Al felt his blood run cold. Waiting, that word again. "Return fire, destroy those platforms." The fleet opened up with everything they had. Energy beams lanced through space, missiles streaked toward targets, particle cannons tore at the darkness. They hit dozens of platforms, turning them into expanding clouds of vapor. But for every one destroyed, two more activated, and they weren't just firing projectiles anymore. High Commander, we're detecting electronic warfare attacks. They're trying to penetrate our command network. Impossible, Al said. Our systems are quantum encrypted. No primitive species could possibly. They're in, High Commander. They've bypassed the encryption. They're not breaking it there. They're exploiting a we didn't know existed. Al's blood turned to ice. In quantum encryption. That would require decades of theoretical research, an understanding of technology that shouldn't exist, unless these humans had been studying, preparing, planning for this exact moment. Isolate the affected systems. Cut all network connections if you have to. But it was too late. Across the fleet, ships reported the same problem. Command and control systems flickered and failed. Targeting computers provided false data. Communications channels filled with noise. The humans weren't just fighting. They were dismantling the fleet's ability to coordinate. Through the chaos, Al could see Earth below, serene and blue and utterly unconcerned. He had assumed the planet's silence meant fear. Now he understood. It had meant confidence. Regroup, he ordered. Pull back to defensive formation. We need to reassess. The fleet tried to comply, but the humans weren't giving them time. Small ships, dozens of them, came screaming out of Earth's atmosphere. They looked like cargo haulers, mining vessels, research craft. Nothing military. But they moved with precision and purpose, targeting the ships that were already damaged, striking at wounded prey. One of these human ships rammed directly into a cruiser's engine section. The explosion took out 3 more vessels nearby. They're using suicide attacks, someone shouted. But Al watched the data carefully. No, not suicide. The humans were evacuating their crews at the last second using some kind of small escape pods. They were sacrificing their ships, yes, but not their lives. Every attack was calculated. Every loss meant something. This wasn't the desperate flailing of a primitive species. This was strategy. High Commander, we're receiving another transmission from the planet. Al wanted to ignore it to focus on saving his fleet, but something made him listen. The same human voice spoke, still calm. You came expecting an easy conquest. You believed we were primitive and unprepared. You were wrong about the second part. We've been planning for this day since we first looked at the stars and realized we might not be alone. Every scientist, every engineer, every person on this planet has spent their entire lives preparing for someone like you. We don't want war. We never did. But if you bring it to our home, we will show you what humanity is capable of. Turn back now. This is your only warning. Al stared at the blue planet, at the debris field that had once been a third of his fleet, at the small human ship still harrying his forces. For the first time in his career, he felt genuine fear. These humans had turned their entire solar system into a weapon. Every asteroid, every satellite, every piece of orbital infrastructure was part of a defensive network that had been decades, maybe centuries, in the making. They had studied potential enemies they had never met. They had prepared for wars they hoped would never come. And now that war was here. They were fighting with a cold, methodical fury that made the Confederacy's brutality look like mercy. High Commander, his tactical officer said quietly, "What are your orders?" Al looked at his remaining ships, at his crew, at the impossible situation they had flown into. He had 2 choices: retreat and admit defeat, or press forward and watch his entire fleet die. He made his decision. All ships advance. We will take this planet no matter the cost. It was a decision he would not live to regret. The fleet pushed forward and Earth's defense intensified. More weapons platforms activated, revealing themselves from hiding spots throughout the inner solar system. They had been waiting not just in Earth's orbit, but at the Moon, at the Lagrange points in the asteroid belt beyond Mars. The humans had fortified everything. Al watched his tactical display with growing horror. Every advantage the Confederacy had relied upon was being stripped away. Their superior numbers meant nothing when they couldn't coordinate. Their powerful weapons meant nothing when they couldn't target effectively. Their vast experience meant nothing because they had never fought an enemy like this. The humans didn't fight like any species they had encountered. They didn't mass their forces for a decisive battle. They didn't defend specific locations. Instead, they were everywhere and nowhere, striking from unexpected angles, using the terrain of space itself as a weapon. They fought like prey that had evolved into predators, using every trick and trap at their disposal. A wing of fighters dove toward Earth's atmosphere, attempting to break through and strike at ground targets. They never made it. Human interceptors rose to meet them, smaller and more maneuverable, flown by pilots who knew every current and thermal in their own atmosphere. The dogfight was brief and brutal. Not a single fighter survived. "High Commander, we're losing ships faster than we can count," his tactical officer reported. The officer's voice was strained, professional discipline barely holding. "We've lost over 200 capital ships. The humans are focusing on our command vessels, our supply ships, anything that keeps the fleet coordinated." Al gripped his command chair. 200 ships, a quarter of his fleet gone in less than a day. The Confederacy had never suffered losses like this. Not against the crystalline warriors of Arcturus VI, not against the plasma entities of the barrier. Never. "What about ground assault?" he demanded. "Send landing parties to their moons, their orbital stations, take hostages, force them to negotiate." The operations officer worked his display, then shook his head. "High Commander, we've already tried. Landing teams were sent to their moon and to several orbital facilities. We've lost contact with all of them." "Lost contact, all of them?" "Yes, High Commander. The last transmission we received mentioned ambushes. The humans had troops waiting, in environment suits hidden in the terrain. They knew exactly where our landing parties would go." Of course they did. These humans had spent generations preparing. They had wargamed every possible invasion scenario. They had turned every rock and crater into a potential ambush point. Al pulled up the tactical map of the solar system. The fleet was deep in the gravity well now, surrounded by human defenses. Behind them, the exit vectors that would let them escape to faster-than-light speeds were blocked. "What are those contacts?" he asked, pointing at clusters of signals between them and open space. The tactical officer enhanced the display. "Mines, High Commander. Thousands of them. Maybe tens of thousands. They're seeded across every major route out of the inner system." "When were they deployed?" "Unknown, High Commander, based on their positioning and the orbital mechanics involved. Some of them have been there for decades, long before we ever entered this system." Al felt the last of his confidence crumble. These humans hadn't just prepared for invasion. They had prepared for invasion by an enemy they had never met, using technology they didn't yet understand, defending against tactics they had only theorized about. They had done all of this while simultaneously building a civilization, advancing their technology, living their lives. "What kind of species did that?" "We're trapped," he said quietly. The bridge fell silent. Every officer understood what that meant. The fleet had come to conquer. Now they were the ones fighting for survival. A new alarm blared. "High Commander, multiple contacts approaching from the outer system. Large signatures moving fast." Al pulled up the sensor data. Ships were coming from the asteroid belt, from the outer planets. They weren't military vessels. They were mining ships, colony transports, science vessels. Anything the humans could retrofit with weapons or use as a battering ram. They were throwing everything they had at the fleet. And it was working. The human vessels used tactics no military academy would teach. They used debris as cover. They shut down their engines and drifted, waiting for ships to pass before striking. They coordinated without conventional communications, using tactics so unpredictable that the computers couldn't anticipate them. Because they weren't following a playbook. They were improvising, adapting, thinking. "High Commander, the Eternal Conquest is taking damage," his tactical officer shouted. "Multiple impacts on the port side, shields at 60%. The flagship shuddered. Al grabbed his armrest as the artificial gravity fluctuated. On the viewing screen, he could see a human cargo hauler burning hard toward them, its engines pushed far beyond safe limits. "Destroy it," he ordered. Energy beams lanced out, striking the human ship. It came apart in sections, but its momentum carried the wreckage forward. Pieces of hull, engine components, cargo containers, all traveling at lethal velocities, hammered into the Eternal Conquest shields. The barrier flickered and failed in 3 sections. Al realized with cold certainty that the humans had calculated this. They had known their ship would be destroyed. They had accepted it. They had used it. "Evacuate the port sections, seal the bulkheads," he ordered, but he knew it was only buying time. Around him, the bridge crew worked frantically. They were the best the Confederacy had to offer, veterans of a dozen campaigns, but they had never faced anything like this. They had never fought an enemy willing to sacrifice so much, to fight so smart, to be so absolutely ruthless in defense of their home. A transmission cut through the chaos, the same human voice, still eerily calm. "Fleet, this is Earth Defense Command. You have one final chance. Surrender your vessels and you will be treated as prisoners of war under our conventions. Your crews will be held safely until arrangements can be made. Refuse, and we will continue until every one of your ships is destroyed. You have 5 minutes to respond." Al's first instinct was to refuse, to snarl defiance. The Confederacy did not surrender, but he looked at his tactical display, at the shrinking number of green icons representing his ships, at the growing field of debris that had once been vessels. He thought about the 200 ships already lost, the thousands of crew members dead, the landing parties that had vanished without a trace, the mines waiting to tear apart any ship that tried to flee, the weapons platforms that kept revealing themselves from hiding, the human ships that kept coming, wave after wave, each one piloted by someone willing to die to protect their world. He thought about the message the humans had sent. "We've been waiting for you." They had been waiting, preparing, planning, turning their entire civilization into a weapon just in case. "High Commander," his communications officer asked, "your response?" Al looked at the blue planet on the screen, so peaceful and beautiful and absolutely deadly. He opened his mouth to give the order to surrender. Then the Eternal Conquest reactor breach alarm screamed. "Damage to the primary core," someone shouted. "Cascade failure, we have maybe 2 minutes before." The ship lurched violently. Al was thrown from his chair. Emergency lights flared red. The viewing screen showed a human mining vessel, tiny compared to the Eternal Conquest, pulling away from their hull. It had somehow gotten through the shields, through the point defense, close enough to strike at the flagship's most vulnerable point. "Impossible," Al whispered. But clearly it wasn't. "All crew abandon ship," he ordered. "Get to the escape pods now." The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as officers moved toward the emergency exits. Al stayed at his station, watching the tactical display. The fleet was breaking apart. Some ships were trying to surrender. Others were still fighting. A few were attempting to run the minefield, desperate to escape. He pulled up the long-range communications array with shaking hands and sent a final message back to the Confederacy. "This is High Commander Al of the Eternal Conquest. The invasion of Earth has failed. The humans are not primitive. They are not unprepared. They have turned their entire solar system into a killing field. They fight with intelligence, strategy, and determination beyond anything we've encountered. Every human is a soldier. Every structure is a weapon. Every planet and moon is a fortress. We came to conquer. We will not leave. Tell the Confederacy, stay away from Earth. Tell every species in the galaxy. These humans are not to be underestimated. They are not prey, they are. The reactor went critical. The Eternal Conquest, flagship of the Confederacy's greatest invasion fleet, broke apart in a ball of white fire. High Commander Al's message was cut short, but the transmission had been sent. His final words, a warning that would never be heeded, drifted through space toward distant stars. Around Earth, the battle continued, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. 3 months after the fleet entered Earth's solar system, the last enemy vessel was destroyed. It had been a supply ship, hiding in the shadow of Jupiter's moon Io, hopping to wait out the fighting and make a run for deep space. Human patrol craft found it through careful, systematic searching. They offered surrender. The crew, out of supplies and hope, refused. They chose death over captivity. The humans obliged. Admiral Sarah stood in the command center buried deep beneath what used to be Colorado, looking at the tactical display that now showed a solar system empty of threats. Around her, exhausted officers monitored the screens, scanning for any sign of surviving forces. They would keep scanning for months, maybe years. Humans didn't take chances. "Final count," she asked. Colonel pulled up the data. 847 capital ships entered the system. 847 were destroyed. No survivors, at least none that we've detected. "Keep looking. I want every moon, every asteroid, every piece of orbital infrastructure searched. If there's a alive somewhere in this system, I want to know about it." "Yes, ma'am." Rubbed her tired eyes. She had been awake for what felt like weeks, coordinating Earth's defense from this bunker while the surface burned under bombardment. They had won, but the cost had been catastrophic. 15 million dead in the initial attacks, entire cities damaged, orbital infrastructure in ruins, 3 of their best defense platforms destroyed. But they had won. "Ma'am," another officer said, "long-range sensors are detecting something, a fleet coming from the direction of their space, smaller than the first one, maybe 60 ships." The command center tensed, felt her stomach drop. Time to arrival. 4 weeks, they're coming in slow and careful, they're scanning everything. Nodded slowly. "They're coming to find out what happened, prepare a message." "What kind of message, ma'am?" Thought about the battle, the desperate fighting, the human crews who had piloted their ships into vessels, evacuating at the last second, the soldiers who had fought in the airless void of Luna's surface, the children who had huddled in shelters while death reigned from above, the species that had spent centuries preparing for a day they hoped would never come. "Record this," she said. "Broadcast it toward their fleet on all frequencies. I want them to hear it loud and clear." The communications officer activated the recording system, took a breath and spoke. "This is Admiral Sarah of the United Earth Defense Force. You are approaching the Sol system. 3 months ago, your Confederacy sent 847 warships to conquer Earth. 847 warships were destroyed. Not a single vessel escaped. Not a single escape pod reached safety. We tracked down every last survivor and gave them the choice to surrender. Most chose to fight. We granted their wish." She paused, looking at the display showing the approaching fleet. "You're probably wondering how a primitive species could destroy your invasion fleet. The answer is simple. We are not primitive and we were not unprepared. Humanity has been watching the stars since we first climbed down from the trees. We've been preparing for hostile contact since we first split the atom. We've spent centuries, generations, countless resources turning our solar system into the most heavily defended territory in known space, not because we wanted war, but because we understood that the universe might not be kind." His voice hardened. "Your people came to our home, they threatened our families. They killed 15 million civilians before our defenses could respond. They believed they were apex predators coming to claim easy prey. They died learning the truth. Humanity is not prey. We are patient. We are intelligent. We are creative. And when you threaten our home, we are absolutely ruthless." She gestured, and a data package began transmitting alongside her voice. I'm sending you a complete tactical breakdown of how your fleet was destroyed. Every tactic, every weapon, every strategy. This is not a boast. This is a warning and an offer. You can take this information back to your confederacy. You can share it with every species in the galaxy. Let them know what happens when you attack Earth. Let them understand that we don't seek conquest. We don't want your worlds. We only want to be left alone. Leaned forward, her words carrying the weight of a species that had just fought for its survival. But make no mistake, if you come to our home with hostile intent, we will fight with everything we have. We will use every weapon, every tactic, every advantage at our disposal. We will turn our solar system into your grave. This is not a threat. This is a promise, backed by 847 destroyed warships. She paused, then added something softer. Humanity is capable of terrible things when threatened, but we're also capable of mercy. Your choice determines which you receive. Turn back now. Take our message. Share it with your people. Stay away from Earth and we'll stay away from you. There's a whole galaxy out there. Surely there's room for all of us to exist without conflict. Signaled for the recording to stop. Transmit that, and prepare our defenses. If they keep coming, we hit them at the edge of the system. We don't let them get close to Earth again. Yes, ma'am. The command center fell into practiced routine, officers moving to prepare for potential combat. But watch the long-range sensors, watching that distant fleet. 4 days later, the fleet stopped. They held position at the edge of the belt, far beyond the range of human weapons. For a week, they sat there, scanning, analyzing, undoubtedly trying to understand how an entire invasion force had simply vanished. Then they turned around. All 60 ships fired their engines and accelerated away, back toward Confederacy space. The command center erupted in quiet cheers. Officers hugged each other. Some cried. They had done it. They had sent a message and it had been received. But didn't celebrate. She pulled up the long-range communication logs and started composing the next message. This one would go to every human colony, every research station, every ship in the fleet. Attention all human forces. The immediate threat has passed. The Confederacy has withdrawn. However, we must assume that other species will learn what happened here. Some will see us as dangerous. Some will want to challenge us. Some may seek alliance. All will want to understand what happened in the Sol system. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. We did not seek this war. We did not want to reveal our capabilities. But now that the galaxy knows we exist and knows we can defend ourselves, everything changes. Continue all defensive preparations. Continue development of new systems and strategies. Continue training. We bought ourselves time, maybe decades, maybe longer. But humanity's isolation is over. The age of contact has begun, and it began with blood. Transmitted the message and sat back in her chair. Around her, the command center continued its work. Repairs were being planned. New weapons were being designed. The defense network was being expanded. Humanity had been preparing for first contact to go wrong. They had been proven right. Now they would prepare for what came next. 6 months later, a strange thing happened. Ships began arriving at the edge of the Sol system. Not warships, not invasion fleets. These were diplomatic vessels, research ships, trade haulers. They came from a dozen different species, all broadcasting the same basic message. We come in peace. We wish to open relations with humanity. Some came out of fear, wanting to avoid Earth's fate. Some came out of curiosity, wanting to understand the species that had destroyed a Confederacy fleet. Some came with genuine offers of friendship, recognizing in humanity a potential ally. Earth responded to each one carefully. They allowed some ships to approach. They sent delegations to meet with others in neutral space. They shared some technology and other secrets. They made it clear. Humanity was willing to engage with the galaxy, but on human terms. The story of the fleet spread across known space, growing with each retelling. Some species claimed the humans had used planet-killing weapons. Others said Earth had an army of artificial intelligence drones. A few believed the humans had psychic powers or could manipulate gravity itself. The truth was simpler and somehow more frightening. Humanity had won through preparation, intelligence, and sheer determination. They had turned their lack of superior technology into an advantage by fighting smarter, by using their environment, by refusing to give up. They had proven that raw power wasn't everything. The Confederacy officially declared the Sol system off-limits. They claimed the battle had been a misunderstanding. They said their lost fleet had been destroyed by some kind of natural phenomenon. Nobody believed them, but the fiction was maintained. The Confederacy had built its reputation on unstoppable conquest. Admitting that a primitive species had destroyed their greatest fleet would shatter that reputation. So they stayed silent, and the galaxy drew its own conclusions. In the years that followed, Earth became something unique in galactic politics, a species that no one wanted to fight, but many wanted as an ally. Humanity's reputation as defensive fighters became legendary. Their solar system became known as the one place in the galaxy that could never be conquered. And humanity, they continued preparing. They built more defenses. They trained more soldiers. They studied every species they encountered, learning their strengths and weaknesses. They prepared for the next threat, the next crisis, the next war. Because humanity had learned an important lesson. The universe was not inherently hostile, but it wasn't inherently safe either. Somewhere out there, another species might decide Earth looked vulnerable. Another fleet might come to test humanity's defenses. Another war might come to their home. And when it did, humanity would be ready. Admiral retired 5 years after the war, as it came to be known. She spent her remaining years writing a manual on defensive strategy that became required reading at every military academy on Earth. The final passage read, "We didn't start the war, we didn't want it. But when it came to our doorstep, we ended it. That is the essence of human military doctrine. We don't seek conflict, we don't glorify war, we don't conquer for the sake of conquest. But if you bring war to our home, if you threaten our families, if you believe we are easy prey, you will learn what it means to fight humanity. You will learn that we are patient, we are clever, and we are absolutely committed to our survival. You will learn that Earth is not a prize to be claimed. It is a fortress that has stood for millions of years, and it will stand for millions more. And if you're unlucky enough to attack it, you will become another chapter in the story we tell our children. Another warning we broadcast to the stars. Another lesson in why you should never, ever underestimate humanity." Years later, young humans would look up at the stars and ask their parents about the war. They would hear the stories of brave pilots and clever engineers and ordinary people who became heroes. They would visit the memorials for the 15 million who died. They would learn about Admiral and High Commander Al and the battle that changed everything. And they would understand. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their technology. It was their ability to prepare, to adapt, to think, and to never give up. It was the quality that had carried them from caves to cities to stars. It was the reason why, when they attacked Earth, no one returned. The blue planet continued spinning, but unbroken, home to a species that had proven what they were capable of. The orbital defenses remained, watching the stars. The message buoy floated in high orbit, broadcasting its warning to anyone who came close enough to hear. And humanity looked to the future, ready for whatever came next, certain of only one thing: they would survive. They would endure. They would protect their home. Because that's what humans do.